Robert Chen pushed his cleaning cart down the empty hallway of Riverside Performing Arts Academy. The wheels squeaked softly against the polished floor, breaking the silence that filled the building after hours. It was 7:30 in the evening and everyone had gone home. The students, the teachers, the office staff, all of them had rushed out the doors, eager to start their weekends. But for Robert, this was when his real workday began. He had been the night janitor here for almost 12 years now. 12 years of mopping floors, emptying trash bins, and wiping down windows. 12 years of being the invisible man that nobody really noticed or talked to. When people did see him, they'd give a quick nod or a half smile before hurrying past. That was fine with Robert. He didn't mind being invisible. In some ways, he preferred it. At 58 years old, Robert had learned to find peace in the quiet routine of his work. There was something calming about cleaning an empty building. No rush, no pressure, no one watching over his shoulder. Just him, his cart, and the gentle echo of his footsteps in the hallways. Tonight was like most other nights. He started on the 3rd floor, working his way through the practice rooms where students spent their afternoons learning instruments. The rooms still smelled faintly of rosin and sheet music. Sometimes he'd find a forgotten pencil or a hair tie left behind on a music stand. He'd collect these items and place them in the lost and found box by the main office. As he cleaned, Robert could almost hear the ghost sounds of the day. Violins practicing scales, a frustrated trumpet player hitting the same wrong note over and over, a piano student working through a difficult passage. He knew the rhythm of this place. After 12 years, he knew which rooms got used the most, which students stayed latest, and which teachers forgot to turn off the lights. Robert moved to the 2nd floor, where the larger rehearsal spaces were located. He dusted the chairs in the choir room, arranged them in neat rows. He cleaned the whiteboard in the theory classroom, erasing complicated notes about chord progressions and time signatures. Things that once meant everything to him but now were just marks to wipe away. Finally, he reached the 1st floor. This was his favorite part of the night. At the end of the main corridor was the Academy's crown jewel, a beautiful auditorium with velvet seats and perfect acoustics. And right in the center of that stage sat a magnificent grand piano. A Steinway, black and glossy, worth more than Robert had earned in the past 5 years combined. He pushed his cart through the auditorium doors. The space always took his breath away, even after all these years. The high ceiling, the elegant lighting, the way sound carried perfectly from stage to the back row. This room had been built for music, and you could feel it in every corner. Robert walked down the aisle toward the stage, his footsteps muffled by the carpet. He climbed the side steps and approached the piano. This was the part of his job he took most seriously. The piano had to be cleaned with special care. He pulled out his soft microfiber cloth, the one he kept separate from all his other cleaning supplies. Gently, carefully, he wiped down the glossy black surface. He removed any fingerprints or dust, making sure the wood gleamed under the stage lights. Then came the keys. He cleaned each one individually, white and black, removing the oils and dirt left behind by countless fingers throughout the day. As he worked, memories flickered in his mind. Memories he usually tried to keep locked away. But here, alone with this piano, they had a way of surfacing. He remembered being 17 years old, smaller and skinnier, sitting at a piano just like this one. He remembered his teacher, Mrs. Patterson, standing beside him and saying, "Robert, you have something special. Real talent. The kind that comes along once in a generation." He remembered the acceptance letter from Juilliard, the finest music school in the country. The scholarship that would cover everything. His mother crying tears of joy in their small apartment in Detroit. His father, who had passed away 2 years earlier, would have been so proud. He remembered his first year in New York. The intensity of the program, the other talented students who became his friends, the feeling that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was going to be a concert pianist. He was going to play in the greatest halls in the world. His future was bright and clear. Then he remembered the phone call that changed everything. His sophomore year, middle of the fall semester. His mother's voice on the other end, weak and frightened. The doctors had found something. Cancer. Aggressive. She needed him home. There had been no question in his mind. He withdrew from Juilliard that same week, packed his bag, said goodbye to his dreams, and took the bus back to Detroit. His mother needed him, and family came first. That's what his father had always taught him. The next few years were a blur of hospital visits, medical bills, and working whatever jobs he could find to keep them afloat. His mother fought hard, and for a while it looked like she might beat it. But cancer is cruel, and it took her anyway, 3 years after that first diagnosis. By the time she passed, Robert was 23 years old. Too old to go back to Juilliard as if nothing had happened, too far behind the other students his age who had kept practicing and performing, too broke to afford another chance. Life had moved on without him, so he moved on too. He found work, paid off the medical debts, and built a simple, quiet life. He got married to a kind woman named Linda. They had a daughter together. He worked in factories, in stores, in office buildings. Eventually, he found his way to Riverside Academy, where he discovered he could at least be near music, even if he couldn't be part of it anymore. Robert finished cleaning the piano keys and stepped back. The instrument looked perfect now, ready for tomorrow's students. He knew their names, though they didn't know his. Young talents, 14 and 15 years old, with dreams as big as his had once been. He glanced at his watch. Still had the rest of the building to finish. But he allowed himself one small indulgence, something he did almost every night when no one was around. Robert sat down on the piano bench. His cleaning cart was right there, evidence that he was still working, still doing his job. But for just a moment he let his fingers rest on the keys. He didn't press down, didn't make a sound. He just felt the smooth, familiar surface beneath his hands. This was as close as he got to the life he'd left behind. A few stolen moments with an instrument that once knew him better than anyone. A quiet reminder that before he was a janitor, before he was just another face in the crowd, he had been someone who could make magic with these 88 keys. Robert stood up, grabbed his cart, and headed for the exit. The rest of the building was waiting. Tomorrow would come and the cycle would repeat. Students would practice, teachers would instruct, and Robert would clean up after everyone left. That was his life now, and he'd made peace with it. Or at least that's what he told himself every night as he walked away from the piano, leaving his old dreams asleep on that stage. Friday night at Riverside Academy was different from the usual quiet evenings Robert had grown accustomed to. Tonight the building was buzzing with activity. The annual gala fundraiser was in full swing, and the place had been transformed into something almost unrecognizable. Robert had arrived at his usual time, 6 p.m., but instead of an empty building, he found caterers rushing around, event staff setting up tables, and well-dressed people beginning to arrive. The main reception hall, which he normally cleaned in peaceful silence, was now filled with round tables covered in white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and elegant centerpieces. His supervisor, Mr. Davis, had called him 2 days earlier to explain the situation. The Academy held this fundraiser every year to support scholarships for talented students who couldn't afford the tuition. It was a big deal. Rich donors, local politicians, successful alumni all coming together to write checks and feel good about supporting the arts. "We'll still need you here, Robert," Mr. Davis had said. "Just to handle any messes, keep the restrooms stocked, that sort of thing. Stay in the background, be available if needed. You know the drill." Robert knew the drill. Stay invisible. Be helpful but not noticeable. Clean up quietly and don't disturb the guests. He'd worked events like this before at other places. He understood his role. He changed into his work uniform in the small janitor's closet on the basement level, the navy blue shirt and pants, his name tag pinned to his chest. He looked at himself in the small mirror hanging on the inside of the closet door. Just another working man, invisible in plain sight. Upstairs, the event was already underway. Robert positioned himself near the service corridor where he could watch for spills or emergencies without being in the way. Through the doorway, he could see the transformation of the Academy's humble reception hall into something glamorous. People mingled with champagne glasses in hand. Women wore elegant dresses and sparkly jewelry. Men wore tuxedos and expensive watches. They laughed loudly, air-kissed each other's cheeks, and talked about things Robert couldn't quite hear from his position. A stage had been set up at the front of the room. With the Academy's grand piano moved from the auditorium for tonight's entertainment, Robert felt a small pang seeing it there, out of its usual home, but he understood. The piano was the star of the evening. A renowned pianist named David Wellington was scheduled to perform, someone who had graduated from Riverside 30 years ago and gone on to international fame. The event coordinator, a thin woman with a clipboard who looked stressed beyond measure, rushed past Robert several times. She was talking rapidly into a headset, coordinating everything from the timing of the dinner courses to the sound system setup. Robert grabbed a mop and bucket and stationed himself near the restrooms. Sure enough, within the first hour, someone spilled red wine near the entrance. He cleaned it up quickly, efficiently before it could stain the carpet. A few people glanced at him, but most didn't even notice. He was part of the background, like the wallpaper or the exit signs. Dinner was served around 7:30. Robert watched from the corridor as waiters delivered plates of food that looked like art. Tiny portions arranged beautifully on large white plates, the kind of food that cost more per bite than Robert spent on his entire lunch. During dinner, the Academy's director gave a speech about the importance of music education and how the scholarships changed lives. People clapped politely between bites. Then an auction started, with items like private music lessons with famous teachers and tickets to Broadway shows. The amounts people paid were staggering to Robert. $5,000 for a weekend at someone's vacation home. $3,000 for a signed guitar from a rock legend. Around 8:45, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The lights dimmed and the event coordinator introduced David Wellington, the evening's featured performer. The crowd applauded enthusiastically as a distinguished-looking man in an elegant tuxedo walked toward the stage. But he never made it there. Halfway across the room, David Wellington suddenly stopped. His face went pale. He clutched his chest and stumbled forward. People around him gasped and reached out to catch him. Someone shouted for a doctor. The applause turned into worried murmurs and then concerned voices. Robert moved closer, still staying out of the way, but ready to help if needed. He could see the pianist sitting in a chair now, loosening his bow tie. A woman who identified herself as a doctor was checking his pulse and asking him questions. "Call 911. The doctor said firmly. "He needs to go to the hospital. It might be his heart." The elegant atmosphere of the gala shattered instantly. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They loaded David Wellington onto a stretcher and wheeled him out, the crowd parting to let them through. The pianist kept apologizing as they took him away, saying he was sorry, so sorry for ruining the evening. After the ambulance left, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. The event coordinator looked like she might cry. She huddled with the Academy director and a few board members, all of them talking in urgent whispers. Robert could hear fragments of their conversation. "What do we do now? We can't just cancel the performance. People paid a lot of money. Is there anyone else who can play? Any of the teachers? They've all been drinking. You can't perform piano drunk, and most of them don't play at that level anyway. This is a disaster, an absolute disaster." The coordinator addressed the crowd, her voice shaking slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we sincerely apologize for this unfortunate situation. Mr. Wellington is being taken care of, and we'll provide updates on his condition. We're currently trying to arrange an alternative performance for this evening. Please enjoy the dessert course while we sort this out." People returned to their tables, but the energy had changed. The excitement was gone, replaced by awkward disappointment. Robert heard them whispering to each other. Some were sympathetic about the pianist's health. Others seemed more concerned about not getting the show they'd paid for. Robert stood there, watching the coordinator frantically make phone calls, trying to find someone, anyone, who could play piano at a professional level on zero notice. Every call ended the same way. People were unavailable or out of town or not skilled enough for this kind of audience. Something stirred inside Robert, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. His fingers tingled. His heart beat a little faster. He looked at the grand piano sitting there on the stage, untouched, waiting for someone to bring it to life. He thought about all those nights, alone in the auditorium, sitting on that bench with his hands resting on the keys, all those memories locked away, all that music still living somewhere inside him, despite decades of silence before he could stop himself, before he could think about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Robert found his feet moving forward. He walked toward the stressed coordinator, who was now leaning against a table with her head in her hands. "Excuse me, ma'am," Robert said quietly. She looked up, saw his janitor uniform and managed a tired smile. "Yes, is there something you need to clean up?" "No, ma'am, I wanted to say that I could play the piano." "If you need someone?" The coordinator stared at him. For a moment, she didn't seem to understand what he'd said. Then she let out a long breath. "That's very sweet of you," she said, her tone kind but dismissive. "But we need a professional." Someone who can perform at a concert level. It's complicated music, very difficult. I understand, Robert said, but I can do it. I used to study piano, a long time ago. The coordinator looked at him more carefully now, taking in his age, his uniform, his weathered hands. Robert could see the doubt in her eyes, the assumption that he was just a kind old man who probably played a little piano at church or something. She was about to say no. He could feel it, but then the academy director walked over, having overheard the conversation. Let him try, the director said wearily. What have we got to lose at this point? If he can play something, anything, it's better than nothing. The coordinator hesitated, then nodded. Fine, okay, can you play for a few minutes? Just to see? Robert nodded. His heart was pounding now, but his hands were steady. He walked toward the stage, aware that a few people were starting to notice. The janitor was walking toward the piano. As he climbed the steps to the stage, he heard it. Laughter, soft at first, then louder. Someone giggled. Others joined in. The sound rippled through the crowd like a wave. Robert sat down at the piano bench, his work uniform looking completely out of place against the elegant instrument. More laughter. He could hear the whispers now, too. Is this a joke? Oh my God, what is happening? Did they really just put the janitor at the piano? Robert positioned his hands over the keys. The laughter continued. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, all of them expecting nothing or worse, expecting him to embarrass himself. He took one deep breath, closed his eyes, and let his fingers drop onto the keys. The first notes cut through the laughter like a knife through silk. Robert's fingers moved across the keys with a confidence that surprised even him. The opening measures of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the reception hall, and the effect was immediate and stunning. The laughter stopped. Not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had flipped a switch. The room fell into absolute silence. Robert kept his eyes closed, letting muscle memory take over. His hands knew this piece. They had known it for 40 years, buried deep in his bones, waiting for this exact moment. The melody was melancholy and beautiful, rising and falling like ocean waves. He had chosen Rachmaninoff for a reason. It was the piece he'd been preparing for his final performance at Juilliard, the one he'd never gotten to play, the one that had haunted him through all these years of silence. The notes flowed from his fingers without effort. His left hand provided the deep, rolling bass lines while his right hand danced across the higher keys, carrying the melody. The piano responded to his touch like an old friend, its voice filling every corner of the hall. Robert could feel the weight of decades falling away. He wasn't a 58-year-old janitor anymore. He was 20 years old again, sitting in a practice room in New York City, losing himself in the music the way he always had. Back when the world was full of possibilities, back when his only job was to make beautiful sounds. The piece moved through its emotional landscape. Soft passages that felt like whispers, then building crescendos that demanded every ounce of strength in his arms. His fingers flew across the keys in the technical sections, hitting notes so quickly they almost blurred together, but each one clear and precise. In the audience, champagne glasses had been set down on tables. Conversations had died mid-sentence. People who had been standing were now finding seats, leaning forward, not wanting to miss a single note. The event coordinator stood frozen near the stage, her mouth slightly open. The academy director had tears in his eyes. At one table, a wealthy donor who had been checking her phone just moments ago now held it forgotten in her hand, her attention completely captured by the janitor at the piano. Robert opened his eyes briefly and saw them all watching him. But he wasn't nervous. This wasn't about them anymore. This was between him and the music, a conversation he'd been having since he was 7 years old, and his mother had scraped together enough money for his first piano lesson. He remembered that teacher, Mr. Kim, an elderly Korean man who lived 3 blocks from their apartment in Detroit. Mr. Kim had recognized something in young Robert immediately. This boy has the gift, he'd told Robert's mother. He hears the music differently than others, and it was true. Robert had always heard music in everything, in the rhythm of rain on the window, in the pattern of his father's footsteps coming home from work, in the way his mother hummed while cooking dinner. The piano had just given him a way to express what he'd always heard. The concerto moved into its second theme, more passionate and urgent. Robert's whole body moved with the music now. His shoulders swayed, his head tilted, his foot worked the pedals with perfect timing. This wasn't just playing notes on a page. This was pouring out everything he'd kept locked inside for all these years. Every sacrifice he'd made. Every dream he'd let go. Every night he'd walked past this piano and felt the ache of what might have been. It all came flooding out through his fingertips and into the air, transformed into something beautiful. A woman in the audience wiped tears from her cheeks. A man in a tuxedo had his eyes closed, completely lost in the sound. At the back of the room, one of the waiters had stopped clearing plates and stood motionless, listening. Music has a strange power. It can reach into your chest and grab hold of something you didn't even know was there. It can make you feel things you can't put into words. That's what was happening in the reception hall of Riverside Academy that night. Robert reached the most difficult section of the piece, a passage that required both hands to move independently in complex patterns while maintaining perfect rhythm. It was the kind of playing that took years of practice to master. His hands executed it flawlessly, like they'd done it yesterday instead of 4 decades ago. The truth was, he hadn't completely stopped playing. Late at night after he'd finished cleaning, he would sometimes sit at this piano and play very quietly, so quietly that the sound barely carried beyond the stage, just enough to feel the keys under his fingers to keep the connection alive. Linda, his wife, knew. She'd known all along about his past, about Juilliard, about what he'd given up. She'd never pushed him to return to music professionally. She understood that some doors once closed were too painful to try to open again, but she'd always encouraged those quiet late-night sessions. "You need it," she'd said once. "Like breathing. I see the difference in you on the nights you play." She was right. Those stolen moments had kept something alive inside him. They'd kept his fingers nimble, his mind sharp, his connection to the music intact. He hadn't realized until tonight that he'd been preparing for something, keeping himself ready for a moment that might never come. But it had come. And he was ready. The piece built toward its conclusion, the melody becoming more insistent, more powerful. Robert's arms moved with strength that surprised him. He wasn't thinking about technique anymore. He was just feeling, just letting the music pour out the way it needed to. The final section arrived, a triumphant resolution that felt like emerging from darkness into light. His hands raced across the keys one last time, bringing together all the themes that had woven through the piece. The sound filled the hall so completely it felt like the walls themselves were vibrating. And then, with a final chord that rang out clear and strong, it was over. Robert held the last note, his foot on the pedal, letting it fade naturally into silence. His hands remained on the keys. He sat there breathing hard, feeling like he'd just run a marathon. Sweat dampened his forehead. His heart pounded in his chest, the silence stretched on. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Robert lifted his hands from the keys and looked up at the audience for the first time since he'd started playing. Every single person in the room was staring at him. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Others looked shocked, their mouths open in disbelief. The event coordinator's hands were pressed to her cheeks. The academy director was shaking his head slowly, like he couldn't believe what he'd just witnessed. Then someone started clapping. A single person, somewhere in the middle of the room. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into applause. Not polite cocktail party applause. Real applause. The kind that comes from deep in your chest that makes your hands hurt because you're clapping so hard. People stood up. The standing ovation rippled through the crowd like a wave. They were shouting, whistling, some were openly crying. The noise was overwhelming after the concentrated silence of the performance. Robert stood up from the piano bench, not quite sure what to do with himself. He wasn't used to this. He'd imagined this moment 1,000 times when he was young, but that was a lifetime ago. Now standing here in his janitor's uniform, feeling the weight of all those years, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt exposed, raw. The academy director rushed onto the stage, pulling Robert into an embrace. "My God," he kept saying. "My God, who are you?" Robert didn't have an answer for that. He was a janitor who used to be a pianist. Or maybe he was a pianist who had been pretending to be a janitor for 40 years. He honestly didn't know anymore. The applause continued, showing no signs of stopping. People were standing on their chairs now, still clapping. The wealthy donors who had laughed when he sat down were now cheering louder than anyone. And Robert Chen, the invisible janitor who cleaned this building every night, suddenly found himself very, very visible indeed. The applause seemed to last forever. Robert finally managed to leave the stage, but people surrounded him immediately. They wanted to shake his hand, to talk to him, to understand what they'd just witnessed. Questions came from every direction. Where did you learn to play like that? Have you performed professionally? Why are you working as a janitor? Robert felt overwhelmed. For 12 years, barely anyone had spoken to him beyond a polite hello or a request to clean something up. Now everyone wanted his attention at once. The event coordinator had to physically create space around him, gently pushing people back. Please, everyone. Give him some room to breathe, she said, though she looked just as stunned as everyone else. The academy director guided Robert to a quiet corner, away from the crowd. His name was Mr. Peterson, and Robert had seen him around the building for years but had never really talked to him. Mr. Peterson's hands were shaking slightly as he pulled out his phone. I need to record this, he said. I need you to tell me who you are. Because that performance, that wasn't amateur playing. That was world class. That was conservatory level. Robert nodded slowly. His heart was still racing, and part of him wanted to just slip away, go back to his cleaning cart, pretend this had never happened. But it was too late for that now. My name is Robert Chen, he began, his voice quiet. I'm 58 years old. And yes, I studied at a conservatory. Juilliard, actually. A long time ago. Mr. Peterson's eyes went wide. Juilliard. The Juilliard School in New York? Yes, sir. I was accepted when I was 17. Full scholarship. I studied there for almost 2 years. 2 years. What happened? Why did you leave? This was the hard part. Robert had told this story only a handful of times in his life. Most people in his current life didn't know about it. His co-workers at the academy, the teachers, the students, none of them had any idea about his past. My mother got sick. Robert said simply. Cancer, she was all I had left. My father had passed away a few years before. So I came home to Detroit to take care of her. But you could have gone back afterwards, right? After she recovered? Robert shook his head. She didn't recover. It took 3 years and then she was gone. By that time I was 23. I'd been away from piano training for 3 years. I'd missed crucial development time. All my peers had graduated and moved on. I had medical debts. No savings. Going back wasn't really an option anymore. Mr. Peterson looked like he might cry. So you just gave it up? Your whole career? I didn't have much choice. Life doesn't always work out the way you plan. I needed to work to survive. Music became something I used to do, not something I could afford to do. But you kept playing. You must have to maintain that level of skill. Robert glanced toward the auditorium. Late at night after I finish cleaning, I sit at the piano in the auditorium. Just for a few minutes, quietly. I didn't think anyone knew. I had no idea, Mr. Peterson said. 12 years you've worked here and I had no idea. Other people were gathering closer now, listening to the conversation. A woman in a silver dress spoke up. Her name badge identified her as Victoria Huang, a board member. This is incredible, she said. Your story is incredible. Do you know what this means? We could share this. The world needs to hear about this. The world? Robert felt uncomfortable with the idea. I don't think... No, really, Victoria pulled out her phone. I recorded your performance. Do you mind if I post it online? This is the kind of story that inspires people. Talent that never dies. Sacrifice for family. The janitor who was secretly a genius. Robert wasn't sure how he felt about being called a genius, or about his life being reduced to a story people shared online. But before he could respond, several others chimed in. I recorded it too. I got the whole thing on video. The acoustics in this room were perfect. The sound quality is amazing. Mr. Peterson put a hand on Robert's shoulder. Listen, I know this is a lot to process right now, but Miss Huang is right. What happened tonight was special. You gave these people something they'll never forget. And maybe this doesn't have to be the end of your story with music. What do you mean? Robert asked. I mean, what if you could teach here? What if you could work with our students? You have so much knowledge, so much experience. We have talented kids who can't afford private lessons with top-level pianists. You could make a real difference in their lives. Robert thought about the students he'd watched over the years. The ones who stayed late, practicing the same measures over and over. The ones who reminded him of himself at that age. He'd never imagined he could be part of their journey in any meaningful way. I don't have teaching credentials, Robert said. We can work around that, Mr. Peterson said quickly. Artist in residence. Master classes. Private coaching. There are ways to make this happen if you're interested. Was he interested? Robert honestly didn't know. His life had been stable for so long. He had his routine, his quiet existence. Opening this door felt dangerous, like inviting in all the pain and regret he'd worked so hard to make peace with. But something had shifted inside him tonight. Sitting at that piano, playing for an audience again, feeling the music flow through him, it had reminded him of something he'd almost forgotten. He wasn't just a janitor who used to play piano. He was a pianist who had taken a long detour. Can I think about it? Robert asked. Of course, Mr. Peterson said. Take all the time you need. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People kept approaching Robert, telling him how moved they were by his performance. Several handed him business cards, saying they wanted to talk to him about opportunities. One man, who introduced himself as a concert promoter, said he could arrange performances at local venues. Robert collected the cards politely, though he wasn't sure what he'd do with them. This all felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. Around 10:30, the gala finally wound down. Guests started leaving, many stopping to shake Robert's hand one more time on their way out. The caterers began cleaning up, and Robert automatically moved to help them, but the event coordinator stopped him. No, she said firmly, but kindly. Not tonight. Tonight you were the performer, not the staff. Go home, rest, you've earned it. Robert drove home in his old Toyota, his mind spinning. The city streets passed by in a blur. He kept replaying the performance in his head, hearing the notes, feeling the keys beneath his fingers. Linda was still awake when he got home, reading a book in bed. She looked up when he walked in, immediately noticing something different about him. What happened? She asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. Robert sat down on the edge of the bed. He didn't know where to start, so he just began talking. He told her about the pianist's medical emergency, about volunteering to play, about the laughter from the crowd. He told her about the performance, about the standing ovation, about the conversations afterward. Linda listened quietly, her eyes growing wider with each detail. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. I knew this would happen someday, she finally said. What do you mean? I knew you couldn't keep hiding forever. You're too good, too talented. The universe has a way of putting people where they belong, even if it takes 40 years to get there. I don't know if I belong anywhere, Robert said honestly. I'm 58 years old. I've been a janitor for over a decade. I don't fit in that world anymore. Maybe you never stopped belonging to that world, Linda said softly. Maybe the world just forgot about you for a while. But now it remembers. Robert pulled out the stack of business cards from his pocket and set them on the nightstand. Names and numbers of people who wanted to talk to him, to work with him, to give him opportunities. They want me to teach at the academy, he said. They want to post videos of my performance online. One guy wants me to do concerts. What do you want? Linda asked. That was the question, wasn't it? What did Robert Chen want? For so long he'd trained himself not to want anything beyond stability and peace. Wanting more had seemed dangerous, a path back to disappointment and pain. But tonight something had awakened in him. A hunger he'd suppressed for decades. The feeling of sharing music with others, of using his gift instead of hiding it away. I think I want to try, he said quietly. I think I want to see what happens. Linda smiled and took his hand. Then you should. You've spent 40 years taking care of everyone else. Your mother, me, our daughter. Maybe it's time to take care of the part of you that's been waiting all these years. Robert looked at his hands. These hands that had mopped floors and emptied trash cans and cleaned piano keys every night. These hands that had just created something beautiful enough to make a room full of strangers cry. Maybe Linda was right. Maybe this wasn't the end of anything. Maybe, impossibly, this was a beginning. Outside their window, the city hummed with its usual late-night sounds. Somewhere out there, videos of his performance were probably already being uploaded to the internet, spreading to people he'd never meet in places he'd never been. His quiet life was about to get a lot less quiet. And for the first time in 40 years, Robert Chen wasn't afraid of what came next. Robert woke up on Saturday morning to his phone buzzing constantly. Text messages, missed calls, notifications piling up one after another. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand, confused. The screen showed dozens of messages from people he barely knew. Linda sat up beside him. What's going on? Robert opened his phone and felt his stomach drop. The first message was from Mr. Peterson with a link to a video. Robert clicked it with shaking hands. There he was, sitting at the piano in his janitor's uniform, playing Rachmaninoff. The video was posted by Victoria Huang, the board member from last night. The caption read, "They laughed when the janitor sat at the piano. Then this happened. The video had been posted 9 hours ago. It already had over 2 million views." "Oh my God," Robert whispered. The comments section was flooded. Thousands of people sharing their reactions. Many were crying face emojis. Others wrote long messages about how the music had moved them, how the story was inspiring, how they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I'm literally sobbing. True talent never dies. This man sacrificed his dreams for his family and still kept the music alive. What a legend." The way the laughter stops immediately. Chills. More videos had been posted by other guests. Different angles, different perspectives, all of the same performance. Each one had hundreds of thousands of views. The story was spreading across social media platforms, being shared by major accounts, picked up by news websites. Robert's phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize with a New York area code. He answered hesitantly. "Hello, is this Robert Chen? The pianist from the Riverside Academy video?" It was a producer from a morning talk show. They wanted to fly him to New York for an interview. Then another call came in from a magazine. Then a local news station. Then a concert hall in Chicago. The calls and messages didn't stop all day. Robert felt like he was drowning in attention. People wanted interviews, performances, his life story. Record labels were reaching out about recording an album. Concert venues wanted to book him. Music schools wanted him to give master classes. "This is crazy," Robert said to Linda as they sat at their kitchen table, his phone still buzzing. "This is absolutely crazy. This is what happens when people see real talent," Linda said. "The world was waiting for someone like you. They just didn't know it yet." By Monday morning, the video had over 15 million views. News outlets around the world were covering the story. The janitor who played like a master. The hidden genius. The American dream deferred but not destroyed. Robert returned to Riverside Academy, unsure what to expect. When he walked through the doors, students who had never noticed him before stopped and stared. Teachers came up to shake his hand. The office staff gave him a round of applause. Mr. Peterson called him into his office first thing. "Robert, please sit down. We need to talk about your future here." Robert sat feeling nervous. Was he in trouble somehow? Had he violated some policy by performing at the gala? "First," Mr. Peterson said, "I want you to know that your job as a janitor is secure if you want to keep it. No one is forcing you to change anything. But," Robert could hear the but coming, "but we'd like to offer you something else. A position as an artist in residence. You'd work with our scholarship students, the ones who have talent but can't afford private lessons with expensive teachers. You'd guide them, mentor them, teach them not just about piano but about perseverance and dedication." Mr. Peterson slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a contract with a salary that was 3 times what Robert made as a janitor. You'd still have your nights free if you wanted to perform elsewhere. Mr. Peterson continued. "We've been contacted by several venues interested in hosting you. This could be the beginning of something remarkable." Robert stared at the paper. This was real. This was actually happening. "The board unanimously approved this," Mr. Peterson added. "After seeing what you did on Friday night, after learning your story, they believe you're exactly what our students need. Someone who understands struggle, someone who never gave up on the music even when life took everything else away." Robert thought about those students he'd watched over the years. The girl who came in at 6 in the morning to practice before school. The boy who stayed until the building closed, working on the same difficult piece for months. The talented kids whose families worked multiple jobs just to afford the tuition. "I'll do it," Robert said. "I want to help them." The transition happened quickly. Within 2 weeks, Robert had his own small office near the practice rooms. Nothing fancy, just a desk and a piano, but it was his. The academy promoted his new position on their website, and the response was overwhelming. Students signed up for his masterclasses. Parents requested private lessons. His first real teaching session was with a 15-year-old girl named Amy. She was talented but discouraged. She'd been rejected from a prestigious summer program and was thinking about quitting piano altogether. "I'm just not good enough," she told Robert, her eyes red from crying. "Maybe I should focus on something more realistic." Robert saw himself in her immediately. That moment when the path forward seems impossible, when giving up feels like the only option. "Let me tell you something," Robert said gently. "I stopped playing professionally at 20 years old. For 40 years I thought that was the end of my story. I thought I'd missed my chance. But talent doesn't have an expiration date. Neither do dreams. They just wait." "But you were at Juilliard," Amy said. "You were already at the top, and I left. I walked away, but I never stopped being a pianist, not really. I just became a pianist who did other things for a while." "You're 15. You have your whole life ahead of you. One rejection doesn't define you. It's what you do next that matters." Amy looked at him with hope in her eyes. "Do you think I can make it?" "I think if you want it badly enough, if you're willing to work for it even when things get hard, then yes. Absolutely. But you have to define what making it means. For me, making it isn't about fame or money. It's about keeping the music alive inside you, whatever that looks like." They worked together for an hour, and Robert watched Amy's confidence slowly return. By the end of the session, she was smiling again, her fingers moving across the keys with renewed energy. This became Robert's new routine. Teaching students, sharing what he'd learned, helping young musicians find their way. Some days he worked with beginners. Other days he coached advanced students preparing for competitions or college auditions. The performance opportunities came too. Small concerts at first, local venues, charity events, then bigger stages, a recital hall in downtown Chicago, a theater in Boston. People came to hear the janitor who became a sensation, but they stayed because the music was genuinely extraordinary. Robert gave several interviews, and he always made sure to talk about his mother, about the choice he'd made, about the years of quiet practice that kept him ready for a moment he didn't know would come. "I don't regret taking care of my mother," he told one reporter. "That time with her was precious. But I also don't regret finding my way back to music." Both things can be true. Life isn't always either or. Sometimes it's not yet instead of never. The story resonated with people around the world. Other late bloomers reached out to him. People who had given up their dreams for family, for survival, for 100 different reasons. His story gave them hope that it wasn't too late for them either. 6 months after the gala, Robert stood backstage at a concert hall waiting to perform. Linda was in the audience, along with his daughter and her family. Some of his students from Riverside Academy were there too, excited to see their teacher perform. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. From Detroit to Juilliard to a janitor's closet to this moment, all the twists and turns, the sacrifices and the waiting. He thought about that night 6 months ago, walking toward the piano while people laughed. How scared he'd been, how uncertain. But he'd done it anyway. He'd let his hands touch those keys one more time. That choice had changed everything. As he walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, Robert understood something he hadn't before. He hadn't wasted 40 years. Those years had taught him patience, humility, gratitude. They'd taught him that talent means nothing without character, that success means nothing without compassion. He sat at the piano and placed his hands on the keys. In the audience, his students watched with wide eyes, seeing possibility in his story, seeing that dreams could survive decades of winter and bloom again in unexpected springs. Robert began to play, and the music that filled the hall wasn't just notes on a page. It was a life fully lived. It was love and loss and perseverance and hope. It was proof that the music inside us never really dies, it just waits for its moment to be heard.